There comes a moment when exhaustion settles into your bones, heavier than sleep and deeper than any ache. It's the kind of tiredness that doesn't leave with a good night's rest, a fatigue born from carrying invisible burdens day after day, long after your strength runs out. You wake before dawn, and instead of hope, you feel the weight of another morning pressing down, as if the darkness outside is mirrored in your own heart. Your mind turns endlessly, chasing questions with no answers, fears that seem larger in the stillness, and doubts that quietly gnaw at the edges of your soul. There is no single event to blame, no catastrophe you can point to and say, "This is why I am afraid." Instead, it's the slow drip of disappointments, the accumulation of whispered lies that you are not enough, the sense that your prayers echo unanswered in a silent universe. At first, you push these feelings aside, determined to stay strong, to keep moving. You cling to routines, make coffee, check your messages, go through motions that once gave you comfort. But the world feels distant, each sound muffled as though you're underwater, separated by something you can't name. Friends and family offer well-meaning words, but they seem to bounce off the surface, unable to reach the place where the ache truly lives. You wonder if anyone else feels this way, if there's anyone who understands what it's like to stand in a crowded room and still feel completely alone. In these moments, the fear is not of something outside, but of a hollowness growing within. You recall times when life felt simpler, when certainty anchored your days and you could trust in the next step. Now those anchors seem to have slipped from your grasp. The future stretches ahead like a fogged landscape, each decision shrouded in anxiety, each hope met with the shadow of "what if?" You try to pray, but the words feel heavy, the silence after each whispered plea even heavier. At night, lying in the dark, you listen for the voice of God, or even the faintest sign, but mostly you hear only your own heartbeat, loud in your ears, counting down the minutes until morning. There are days when fear becomes your closest companion, curling up beside you, whispering stories of failure, rejection, loss. You replay old conversations, wonder about paths not taken, and question if anything you do really matters. Sometimes you catch yourself envying those who seem to move through life with ease, their confidence unshaken, their smiles genuine. You wonder what it's like to live without the constant thrum of dread beneath every thought. Shame follows close behind, reminding you that you shouldn't feel this way, that faith is supposed to conquer fear, and if you were stronger, holier, better, you would not be struggling now. But in the honesty of your struggle, there is a kind of truth that cannot be dressed up or ignored. You begin to recognize that fear isn't just an enemy, it's a signal, a signpost on the road you're traveling. It tells you that something needs attention, that there is pain inside longing to be heard. Yet acknowledging this does not bring relief. Instead, the tension grows. You find yourself caught between wanting to run from your feelings and desperately needing someone to see them. It is an invisible war, one that drains your energy, dims your laughter, and leaves you standing at the edge of yourself, unsure which way to turn. In the quiet hours, you remember words you once believed. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" These verses float up from memory, bringing a flicker of comfort, but also a bittersweet ache, as if belonging to another version of yourself, someone who once believed without question, someone who found solace in promises. Now those promises seem far away, their light barely reaching through the dense fog of your anxiety. You want to believe again, to feel safe, to trust that you are not alone in the dark, but the way back seems lost, the door closed behind you. Every small challenge feels magnified, and decisions that once seemed simple become mountains too steep to climb. The voice of fear is persuasive. It tells you to stay small, to avoid risks, to expect disappointment. Even your prayers become cautious, careful not to hope for too much, as if bracing for letdown is safer than daring to dream. You wonder if God is tired of your asking, if there's a limit to grace, if perhaps your struggles are proof that you are not worthy of being rescued. The world outside continues on, people laughing, life moving, but you remain frozen, stuck in a loop of worry and waiting. Sometimes, in rare moments of honesty, you let yourself grieve for the life you thought you would have. You mourn lost opportunities, fractured relationships, the simple joys that now seem out of reach. The fear is not only of what might come, but of what has already been lost. In this valley, everything feels fragile, even the ground beneath your feet. And yet, somewhere deep inside, there is a stubborn spark, a hope that refuses to die, no matter how bleak the night. It is small, barely a whisper, but it is there. You do not know it yet, but this moment of utter exhaustion, when you have nothing left to give, is also a turning point. The end of your strength is not the end of the story. It is the threshold of something new, not the return to what was, but the beginning of a different kind of journey. One that will not erase your pain or answer every question, but will slowly teach you how to live and even breathe in the midst of fear. The path ahead is uncertain, the shadows deep, but you are still here. And even as you stand trembling at the edge of your own endurance, something within you dares to hope that light can find its way, even into the places you have hidden from yourself. There are nights when the silence feels almost unbearable, when the ordinary sounds of life fade and your mind, untethered from daily distractions, begins to spiral inward. You try to rest, but the questions surface, relentless and sharp. Why am I afraid? What is it that shakes me so deeply? The fear is real, but its edges blur. It isn't always a monster you can name. Sometimes it's the fear of loss, of being left behind, of not measuring up. Sometimes it's the gnawing dread that the world is simply too much, too fast, too unpredictable for your heart to keep pace. Other times, fear slips in disguised as anxiety over small things, a missed call, a strange ache, a word left unsaid. It makes you question every choice, every relationship, every future possibility. Its power lies in its ability to twist reality until even the good appears fragile, precarious, easily undone. You search your memory for the source, the original crack where fear first slipped in. Was it a word spoken in anger years ago? A look of disappointment? The sudden absence of someone you loved? Or is it something deeper, an ancient inheritance, carried like a shadow from childhood, when you learned the world was not always safe and promises could be broken? You remember moments when fear protected you, when it was a warning, a shield. But now it feels like a jailer, keeping you behind invisible bars. You wonder if others see it, this flicker in your eyes, the tension in your voice, the cautious way you approach each new day. Maybe they too are hiding their fears, just beneath the surface, keeping up the brave face while their hearts race with the same secret terror. Your thoughts become a dialogue, circling the same questions. If faith is supposed to drive out fear, why does it linger? If you trust in God, why does dread remain your companion? You replay the teachings you've heard since childhood. Fear not, for I am with you. Be strong and courageous. Perfect love casts out fear. They ring true in theory, but in the hollow hours they feel distant, almost unreachable, as if meant for someone stronger, someone holier. You long to believe that love can banish fear, But your reality is that they live side by side, sometimes indistinguishable, tangled together in the secret chambers of your soul. Your thoughts become a dialogue, circling the same questions. If faith is supposed to drive out fear, why does it linger? If you trust in God, why does dread remain your companion? You replay the teachings you've heard since childhood. Fear not, for I am with you. Be strong and courageous. Perfect love casts out fear. They ring true in theory, but in the hollow hours they feel distant, almost unreachable, as if meant for someone stronger, someone holier. You long to believe that love can banish fear, but your reality is that they live side by side, sometimes indistinguishable, tangled together in the secret chambers of your soul. You start to see how fear colors every aspect of your life. It shapes your words, making you cautious, measured, always searching for the safest path. It seeps into your decisions, leading you to settle for less rather than risk disappointment. It hovers over your relationships, whispering doubts and what-ifs, keeping you from speaking the full truth or reaching out for help. Even your prayers are marked by it. You ask for protection, for answers, but underneath every petition is a tremor of uncertainty, a fear that you might not be heard, or worse, that the answer might be silence. The meaning of fear is not always about danger. Sometimes it's about control, the desperate attempt to hold on to something solid in a world that shifts beneath your feet. Other times, fear is about worthiness, the suspicion that you are not enough, that love and belonging are things to be earned and easily lost. You realize how much effort goes into hiding your fears, building walls of competence and humor and busyness, all to distract from the churning beneath. You become skilled at acting fine, at moving through the day with a mask of calm, even when your insides are shaking. But every mask eventually slips. In the cracks of your composure, you glimpse the rawness underneath. Fear, you see, is not just an emotion, but a lens, a way of looking at the world that magnifies danger and diminishes hope. It makes ordinary challenges seem insurmountable, turns possibility into peril, joy into something fleeting and suspect. You notice how quickly you prepare for the worst, bracing yourself against pain as if that could prevent it. You find yourself rehearsing tragedies that haven't happened, catastrophes you may never face, all in an effort to stay one step ahead of hurt. Still, you sense there is something to learn from these questions, a deeper truth waiting behind the trembling. Fear reveals what matters to you, what you cannot bear to lose, what you yearn to protect. It exposes your need for control and your hunger for reassurance. In this way, fear is not just an enemy, but a mirror, reflecting your deepest attachments and your unspoken longings. It calls you to examine what you believe about yourself, about God, about the world. You are left with the growing realization that the journey is not about erasing fear, but about understanding its message. The question is not only, why am I afraid, but what does this fear tell me about my heart? The first crack has appeared in the wall, and through it, a sliver of light shines. The narrative of your life begins to shift, ever so slightly, as you learn to see fear not as a curse, but an invitation to honesty, to vulnerability, to the possibility that you are loved even in your trembling. And with that realization, the story continues, moving toward a hope that, while still distant, is no longer unimaginable. But even as the night stretches long and the shadows feel endless, something in you strains toward the memory of light. It comes not as a blinding flash, but as a barely perceptible glimmer, a line of silver edging the darkness, so subtle you almost miss it. In the hush of your struggle, words from long ago return, not as doctrine, but as comfort. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The syllables arrive quietly, like footsteps on soft ground, but they refuse to fade. Instead, they become a refrain in the silent places of your heart, a pulse of hope that, though faint, will not be extinguished. It is in these moments, when everything familiar has slipped away, that the language of the Psalms takes on a new and urgent life. You realize that you are not the first to tremble in the darkness, not the only one to cry out for rescue. There is a fierce honesty in these ancient songs, a willingness to name fear, to mourn loss, and yet still to seek the presence of the one who promises refuge. The psalmist does not deny the valley or the enemies that encircle him, nor does he mask his own vulnerability. Instead, he speaks from the raw center of longing. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. These words become a lamp, small but steady, flickering against the wind of your doubts. Hope does not come as certainty or instant relief, but as a gentle invitation to lift your gaze above the ground. It is the surprising calm that follows a storm of tears, the unexplainable peace that settles for a moment amid racing thoughts. Sometimes it is as simple as the memory of sunlight on your skin, the sound of laughter that bubbles up when you least expect it, the steady presence of someone who chooses to stay even when you have nothing left to give. All of these are candles in the darkness, a reminder that all is not lost. You begin to notice these small signs, the first hints of rescue in your wilderness. It might be a passage read by chance, the words perfectly suited to your need. It could be the way a stranger's kindness lingers, warming you long after the moment has passed. Sometimes it is simply the realization that you have survived another day, that despair did not win, that breath still fills your lungs. These are the quiet mercies, unnoticed by most, but for you they are evidence that light is breaking through, that God is not absent even when His presence is hard to feel. Gradually, you see how the Psalms hold together both sorrow and praise, how lament and thanksgiving share the same breath. I sought the Lord, and He answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. There is no denial of pain, no forced optimism, only the lived experience of one who has tasted both bitterness and rescue. This honesty gives you permission to bring your full self before God, not just the polished mask, but the mess and ache as well. You learn that hope is not the absence of darkness, but the conviction that darkness is not the end. The world outside may remain unchanged, troubles may linger at the edges of your days, but inside something shifts. The psalmist's faith is not naive, it is forged in the crucible of real suffering. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, he writes, and saves those who are crushed in spirit. You hear your own story echoed in these lines, and for the first time in a long while, you sense that you are not forgotten. Even in the midnight hour, you are seen. The Creator who set the stars in their courses is not indifferent to your pain. This knowledge does not erase your fears, but it tempers them, steadies your hands, gives you enough courage to face another day. In the stillness, you begin to talk to God with new honesty. The words may falter, but there is a freedom in their imperfection. Sometimes your prayer is nothing more than a sigh, a single plea for help. Other times it is gratitude for the smallest of graces, a cup of water, a moment of laughter, the comfort of a familiar melody. You realize that these prayers, however fragile, are received with tenderness, that the divine is not far off, but near, attuned to the rhythm of your breath. As you trace the contours of the Psalms, you discover a way of living in the tension between fear and faith. The night is still dark, but it is no longer impenetrable. Light seeps in through every crack, an ember of hope, a whisper of salvation. The invitation is not to deny the night, but to look for the places where the dawn is already beginning, to dare to believe that rescue is not only possible, but promised. And as this new perspective settles in, you feel the faint but growing certainty that the story is not finished, that the author of your life is not done writing light into your darkness. There are times when the world grows so quiet that even your thoughts seem loud, when the absence of noise feels both unsettling and strangely sacred. In the aftermath of anxiety, when tears have finally run dry and explanations lose their meaning, you find yourself alone with the silence. It isn't the peaceful quiet of early morning or the hush of a gentle snowfall. It is a deeper, heavier stillness, the kind that presses in on all sides, leaving you uncertain whether to run from it or surrender to its weight. At first, you resist, searching for distractions in the flicker of a screen, the scroll of a feed, anything to avoid the discomfort of being truly alone. But sooner or later, the emptiness settles in, and you are left with nothing but your breath and the steady beat of your heart. The silence, at first, feels merciless. Every worry and regret seems to echo in the hollow space, and you wonder if anyone hears you at all. You ask questions into the void, sometimes quietly, sometimes with a hint of anger, sometimes simply because there is no one else left to ask. Why am I here? Is anyone listening? Does my pain matter? The silence doesn't answer in the way you want. There are no sudden revelations or thunderous replies. Instead, the quiet stretches, inviting you deeper, insisting that you sit with what is real, with everything you have spent so long avoiding. It's in this solitude that you begin to notice a change. What first appeared as emptiness slowly reveals itself as space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to listen. You realize that you have filled your life with noise not just to escape the world, but to avoid your own soul. Now, in the gentle absence of distraction, you hear the faintest whisper, the stirrings of your own heart, the longings that you buried beneath busyness, the grief that needed naming. For perhaps the first time, you dare to sit with your sadness, not trying to fix it, not rushing to explain it away, simply letting it be. There is a strange relief in letting your defenses down, a quiet strength in admitting how tired you are. In the silence, you start to reach out in new ways. Your prayers, once careful and composed, now stumble and falter. They are raw, sometimes wordless, carried more by need than by eloquence. You whisper to God, not with grand declarations, but with a child's honesty. I don't know what to do. I am lost. I am afraid. If you are here, please let me know. At times, your only prayer is the ache in your chest, the tears that come without warning, the longing for presence in a world that feels empty. There is no script for this kind of conversation. It is not about right words, but about showing up with your real self, even when your faith is trembling. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to sense a response. Not a voice thundering from heaven, but a quiet assurance, a gentle nudge to keep going. It might come in the comfort of a memory, in the sense that you are being held even when unseen, or in the sudden calm that settles over you without explanation. The silence itself becomes a form of communication, a sacred space where you are invited not to perform, but to be. You start to understand why the psalmist wrote, "Be still and know that I am God." In this stillness, You realize that being heard does not always mean getting answers. Sometimes it means being met, right where you are, in all your vulnerability. There are moments when you doubt this, when silence feels like abandonment, when prayers seem to vanish into empty air. But you keep returning, not out of obligation, but because somewhere deep inside you, you recognize that this is the place where you are most honest, most awake, most open to the possibility of change. In this holy quiet, you discover that you are not as alone as you feared. The God who formed you in secret meets you here, in your secret place, and for the first time in a long while, you allow yourself to rest. Your prayers do not suddenly resolve your circumstances or erase your questions, but in the practice of showing up, again and again, in hope and doubt, in longing and silence, you find a different kind of answer. It is the peace that comes without reason, the courage to face another day, the awareness that presence itself is a gift. In this space, your soul remembers what it means to listen, not just to the voice of God, but to your own true self. And in the quiet, you begin to believe that even the smallest, most hesitant prayer is heard, and that sometimes the answers you need are found in the silence you once tried so hard to escape. And as you linger in this space between longing and response, you begin to notice something unexpected. The things you once counted as weaknesses are not the liabilities you imagined them to be. For so long, you tried to build yourself up, to hide every fracture, to wear strength like armor, so the world could never guess how deeply you were hurting. You measured yourself by the standards of unshakable faith, unbreakable composure, relentless optimism, and when you inevitably fell short, the disappointment only reinforced your sense of failure. But now, in the hush of honest prayer and gentle silence, another reality quietly takes shape. A reality in which your frailty is not a cause for shame, but the very place where grace chooses to dwell. You recall ancient words that once sounded distant, almost impossible. My strength is made perfect in weakness. They return to you now, not as a reprimand, but as an invitation to see your story through new eyes. You realize that vulnerability is not simply exposure to pain, but the openness that allows love to reach you. The more you try to defend yourself, the less space there is for anyone, even God, to enter. Yet in moments when you finally drop the facade, when you dare to be seen as you are, you find a strange and unexpected freedom. You no longer have to pretend. You no longer need to exhaust yourself keeping the mask in place. In this new way of being, honesty is not a liability, but a key, unlocking connection and comfort you never thought possible. Gradually, you stop fighting your limitations. You notice that the prayers which feel weakest, the ones choked by tears, offered in the lowest valleys, are also the ones that leave you most open to real comfort. Where you once saw defeat, you begin to perceive invitation, to depend, to receive, to admit your need without apology. You discover that surrender does not mean giving up, but letting go of the illusion that you must carry everything alone. It is in this act of letting go that you start to find strength welling up from places you didn't know existed. A deeper resilience, born not of willpower or pride, but of trust. Trust that you are held even when you are not holding everything together. You notice how the Psalms themselves are honest about this paradox. David, revered as a king and warrior, pours out his fears, confesses his failures, admits his exhaustion. And it is precisely here, in his candid admissions, that he finds God most near. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, the Scripture says, and saves those who are crushed in spirit. This is not the victory of the unscathed, but the redemption of the wounded. You begin to realize that what you thought disqualified you from hope, your doubts, your weariness, your inability to muster joy on command, are in fact the very places God meets you with gentleness. From this vantage point, strength is redefined. It is not the absence of struggle, but the courage to keep moving forward even when you feel empty. It is the humility to ask for help, to receive encouragement, to admit your imperfection without letting it paralyze you. It is finding yourself flat on your face and learning, slowly, to get up. Not because you are unbreakable, but because you are loved. Sometimes strength looks like getting out of bed when anxiety tells you not to. Sometimes it means sharing your burden with a friend, or simply staying present with your pain long enough for compassion to rise. You begin to see that your limitations are not obstacles to be eradicated, but teachers, gently guiding you toward a softer, deeper kind of faith. They draw you away from the exhausting pursuit of perfection and into the honest embrace of reality, where being human is not a curse, but a sacred truth. You discover resources inside yourself you didn't know were there, patience you thought had run out, a quiet endurance that carries you through the longest night, the willingness to trust that tomorrow may bring new mercies. And in the quiet heart of your vulnerability, you encounter a kind of strength that cannot be manufactured. It grows quietly, like roots pushing through hard soil, invisible but unshakable. It is the strength of knowing you are seen and loved as you are, not as you wish you were. In this discovery, the tension between strength and weakness is not resolved but transformed. You carry your wounds not as evidence of failure, but as proof that you have lived, loved, and persevered. Here, in this space where your guard is down and your soul is bared, you find yourself held. The paradox becomes your reality. Weakness is no longer a threat, but a doorway, and through it flows a strength that is steady, gentle, and real. Inside you, an invisible struggle unfolds, a battle fought in thoughts and feelings, in each quiet moment when the outside world slows and your inner world roars to life. The opposing sides are intimately familiar, their arguments woven into your days. On one side, fear with its practiced warnings, its vivid memories of disappointment, its well-worn patterns urging you to retreat, to shrink, to guard your heart at all costs. On the other, a trembling impulse to trust, to reach beyond what you can control, to open yourself to something larger and more mysterious than your own anxious logic. The conflict is constant and exhausting, but also strangely sacred, because it is here, in the crucible of your own heart, that the shape of your story is being formed. Fear speaks first, as it often does, persistent and persuasive. It reminds you of the times you risked and were hurt, the promises that ended in silence, the hopes that dissolved into disappointment. It tells you to keep your walls high, to expect little, to stay small and safe. Fear is nothing if not convincing. Its voice is familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. It asks you to rehearse every worst-case scenario, to focus on every uncertainty, to armor yourself with skepticism so you won't be blindsided by pain. The cost of hope, fear insists, is simply too high. But trust, though softer, refuses to be silenced. It is the quiet urge to believe that not everything will end in loss, that goodness is possible even in a broken world, that the unseen can be as real as what you fear. Trust does not shout. Instead, it waits patiently for you to notice, the way the morning light slips through the blinds, the unexpected kindness of a stranger, the moments when peace arrives for no reason you can name. Trust asks you to step forward without guarantees, to let go of the script that always prepares for disaster, to loosen your grip on control and surrender your story to a larger hand. The battle between these voices is not a single decisive event, but an ongoing negotiation, an inner wrestling that shapes the contours of your faith. There are days when fear wins easily, when the shadows lengthen and every risk feels reckless, when you long for certainty so much it aches. On those days you retreat, comfort yourself with old routines, cling to the familiar even when it leaves you restless. But there are also moments, brief but powerful, when trust edges forward. Perhaps you hear it in the psalmist's bold declarations, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" Or feel it in your own decision to speak honestly, to reach out for help, to risk hoping for something better. This battle for your heart is not about erasing fear, but about choosing, again and again, to lean into trust, even while fear shouts for your attention. You learn, slowly, to notice the gap between what fear predicts and what actually unfolds. You remember times when you survived what you thought would destroy you, when comfort came unexpectedly, when grace appeared right at the edge of your endurance. You recognize that trust is not a denial of reality, but an act of courage. It is the willingness to believe in light while still walking through the valley of shadows. Sometimes the battle is fierce and unrelenting, each side gaining ground only to lose it again. You grow weary of the tension, tempted to believe that only one voice can remain. But over time, you begin to see that this conflict is not a sign of failure, but of growth. The very presence of the struggle means you are alive, awake to possibility, unwilling to numb yourself entirely to hope. You start to respect your own courage, the courage it takes to keep showing up, to keep choosing, to keep your heart open, even after it's been bruised. You realize that trust does not mean the absence of fear, but rather the decision not to let fear have the final word. With each small act of faith, a prayer whispered, a hand extended, a promise believed, you reclaim a little more ground. Your heart, once rigid with caution, learns to stretch. The choice is rarely easy, and sometimes you must make it 100 times a day. But as you practice, the balance shifts. Trust, once the underdog, becomes a steady presence. It is not the loudest voice, but it is the one that remains, gentle but unyielding, calling you forward. And so the battle continues, not as a war to be won, but as a dance between caution and courage, self-protection and surrender. In this tension, you are being transformed. The deeper you go, the more you find that trust is not a reckless leap into the dark, but a journey with a guide, a hand reaching for yours, a promise that you are not alone. You move forward, step by trembling step, learning that the unknown, though frightening, may also be the place where your life opens to wonder. And then, quietly, something shifts. It does not come as a lightning bolt or a chorus of angels, but as a presence so gentle you almost miss it. A warmth that finds you in the hollows you thought were empty. A steadying peace that settles just as you're sure you will fall apart. You can't explain how it arrives, only that it does. In the middle of the unraveling, when your heart feels most exposed and defenseless, there is a sense of being held, not by your own strength or the comforting words of others, but by a love that moves beneath words, beneath reason, beneath even your need for explanation. It begins perhaps with the smallest reassurance, a moment when your chest loosens and your breath comes a bit easier, as if an invisible weight has lifted for just a moment. You sense a tenderness that is not your own, a kindness so unexpected that it brings tears without warning. This love does not demand that you change before you are welcome. It does not measure your worth by your resilience or your accomplishments. It simply arrives, meeting you exactly where you are, in the tangle of your doubts and the raw ache of your fears. You notice it in moments you used to overlook, the way sunlight spills across your table in the morning, the hush that follows an honest prayer, the comfort of a favorite song that seems to play at just the right time. Sometimes it is a memory, surfacing gently, a loved one's embrace, the laughter of a friend, a time when you were safe and did not even know it. Other times, it's the courage to try again after another disappointment, the subtle assurance that though the world may shake, something within you remains unbroken. This love does not erase your pain, but it transforms how you carry it. Where you once felt isolated, you now sense companionship. Where you feared being crushed by your own weakness, you find yourself supported by a strength that asks nothing in return. In the scriptures you've heard so many times, "I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with loving kindness." You begin to hear not only ancient promises, but personal invitations. You are wanted, not for what you can offer, but simply because you exist. You are not lost in the crowd, not forgotten among the many. You are seen, named, and cherished. And though doubts still swirl and circumstances may not change, you feel a shift inside. The recognition that love does not depend on your performance or your ability to fix what is broken. It does not grow impatient when you stumble or withdraw when you question. Instead, it remains steady and gentle, inviting you to rest for a moment, to let down your guard, to breathe without bracing for the next blow. Sometimes, in the middle of all that is unresolved, you sense the unmistakable comfort of being known all the way through and loved nonetheless. You begin to realize that you are not walking alone. Even when no one else seems to notice your struggle, even when the silence is profound, there is a presence that refuses to leave. It's there in the sudden calm that comes in the middle of a panic, in the feeling that, somehow, you are carried when you have no strength left to walk. You cannot prove it, nor can you always explain it, but you feel it. A love that refuses to let you slip through its fingers. In these quiet moments, you taste the reality of grace, unearned, unconditional, undiminished by your doubts. The edges of your world become softer, less defined by threat, and more by the gentle assurance that you belong, that you are wanted here. The presence of this love is not always loud or obvious, but it is persistent. It waits for you in the shadows, meets you in your questions, and keeps whispering hope when everything else seems to fall silent. And so you begin to trust, not in the promise that life will be easy, but in the deeper promise that you are never abandoned, never truly alone. Even as the storm rages, even as you stumble forward, you carry with you the unshakable sense that you are supported by a love far greater than your fear. It is this love, invisible yet undeniable, that becomes your anchor, a quiet miracle at the heart of your unraveling, a presence that endures when everything else gives way. It's often in the moments when you feel most exposed, most vulnerable, that the need for shelter becomes impossible to ignore. You realize how fragile you are, how easily circumstances can shift, how quickly life can upend your sense of safety. But it's also in these very moments that something extraordinary can happen. As fear presses in, as the unknown stretches out before you, you encounter a shelter you cannot construct with your own hands, a covering that is not of your own making. At first, you may not recognize it for what it is. The chaos of your thoughts drowns out the gentle invitation. Your heart is too busy bracing for impact to notice the arms quietly gathering you in. Then, almost imperceptibly, you feel it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a quieting of the turmoil within. It might come in the middle of a sleepless night, when the world outside is silent but your mind races with worry. Or it could arrive in a place of noisy uncertainty, when you are surrounded by demands and expectations and the threat of failure seems close at hand. Suddenly, without warning, you sense a protective presence, a boundary that holds back what you most fear, even if just for a moment. You might not be able to explain how you know, but you are convinced, deep down, that you are shielded by something beyond yourself. In these moments, old words take on new meaning. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. The psalmist's declaration becomes personal, a promise that, whatever storms may rage, you have a hiding place, a refuge where fear loses its grip. This refuge isn't escape from reality or denial of pain. It is the experience of being covered, carried, held secure when you cannot hold yourself together. It's a space where you can let your guard down, if only for a heartbeat, and feel the grace of being protected not because you earned it, but simply because you are loved. Perhaps you recall a time when rescue came in a way you never expected. Maybe it was a conversation that arrived right when you were about to give up, or an unexpected act of kindness that broke through your isolation. Sometimes it's the inexplicable peace that comes when nothing in your circumstances has changed, a warmth that covers your panic, a sudden clarity in the middle of confusion. You remember the day you were sure you couldn't go on, and yet, somehow, you did. Looking back, you can see that you were not alone, that the hand you needed reached for you at the very edge of your strength. There are stories written in the quiet moments, when the world spins and you find yourself afraid of what tomorrow might bring. In those nights, you discover that protection is not always the absence of trouble, but the presence of someone who stands between you and what you fear most. The danger is not gone, but its power to define you begins to fade. There is a boundary drawn, sometimes barely perceptible, sometimes unmistakable, where anxiety loses its authority and hope takes root instead. You notice, too, that this shelter is not just for the grand catastrophes, but for the daily aches and the thousand little worries that chip away at your peace. You feel covered in the midst of ordinary life. As you walk into a difficult meeting, as you make decisions that feel impossibly weighty, as you care for someone who is struggling. It's there in the quiet assurance that, no matter what unfolds, you are not left to fend for yourself. The protection is not always visible, but it is no less real for its quietness. This experience of refuge does not make you invincible or immune to harm. Rather, it gives you a safe place to rest, to gather your courage, to breathe deeply even when storms gather overhead. You discover, sometimes with wonder, that there is a strength you can borrow, a shelter that moves with you, a presence that will not abandon you to the shadows. You are given a way through, not around, the challenges before you, a path marked by mercy, guarded by hands stronger than your own. In this sacred shelter, you begin to let go of the compulsion to save yourself, to control every outcome, to outrun every threat. You allow yourself to be small, to be needy, to rest in the knowledge that you are protected and cherished. The world may remain uncertain, but within the walls of this hidden place, you find peace that defies explanation, a peace that keeps you even when you cannot keep yourself. And so you move forward, trusting that the one who shelters you in secret will guide you through whatever comes next, holding you steady beneath his wings. The journey seldom unfolds as you once imagined. The path toward hope and healing, rather than being a gentle climb, is often marked by sharp turns, sudden storms, and stretches of barren wilderness where faith is tested and every step forward feels like a risk. You discover, as so many before you have, that it is precisely here, in the discomfort, the confusion, the moments when you want to turn back, that the substance of your faith is revealed and refined. It is tempting, in the midst of crisis, to believe that trials are evidence of abandonment. You find yourself asking old, aching questions. Why is this happening? Has God forgotten me? Yet, as you listen for answers, you begin to sense that struggle is not the opposite of faith, but its proving ground. You remember the stories that shaped you, ancient accounts of men and women who walked through fire and flood, whose faith was not sheltered from hardship, but forged within it. The Psalms are filled with such voices. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. The psalmist's confidence does not come from an easy life, but from repeated encounters with adversity and the discovery that God is present in the darkness. You think of Abraham, called to leave behind everything familiar and journey into the unknown, trusting a promise that seemed impossible. Or Moses, who led a stubborn and fearful people through a desert with nothing but a word from God and a staff in his hand. Each trial was an invitation to let go of control, to move forward in the absence of certainty, to believe that provision would meet them along the way. Their journeys were marked by moments of doubt, anger, and weariness, yet it was in these very moments that faith deepened and character grew. Your own crises, too, become classrooms for transformation. In the face of disappointment, you are forced to decide whether you will retreat into bitterness or risk hoping again. When you are misunderstood or rejected, you are given the opportunity to learn compassion, both for yourself and others. When resources run dry and answers seem delayed, you discover what it means to rely on grace rather than your own ability to solve every problem. These are not easy lessons, and the process is seldom quick. Sometimes, faith feels more like endurance than certainty, a quiet decision to stay present, to keep praying, to take one more step even when the outcome is hidden from view. You notice how the pattern repeats throughout Scripture. Daniel, facing the lions, his courage rooted not in the absence of danger, but in the presence of God. Job, stripped of everything he loved, refusing to curse God and die, even as his heart broke with questions. Ruth, stepping into a foreign land with nothing but loyalty and trust in her mother-in-law's God. In each story, crisis is not the end, but the crucible, a space where faith becomes more than a word, and hope becomes more than wishful thinking. There are days when you falter, when the trial seems too long, the night too dark. But even here, small miracles can be found. The strength to get up when you want to give in. The friend who calls at just the right moment. The memory of past deliverance that whispers, "You have survived before, you will survive again." Over time, you come to see that trials are not punishments, but invitations to deeper trust, to a surrender that frees you from the burden of having to have all the answers. Gradually, you recognize that the presence of difficulty is not the absence of God, but often the sign that He is closer than ever, working in hidden ways. The stories of Scripture are not given to you as distant legends, but as living proof that grace thrives in adversity, that faith is never wasted, and that transformation is possible in even the harshest conditions. You start to look at your own struggles differently, not as detours, but as the very places where your soul is stretched and refined, where you are shaped into someone new. In this light, the journey through crisis becomes something sacred, not because pain is good, but because it is here that you discover the depths of your own resilience, and the limitless patience of divine love. Faith is not proven in comfort, but in the willingness to trust, to hold on, and to open your heart to growth even in the valley. You walk forward, battered but not broken, carrying with you the hard-won wisdom that in every trial there is an opportunity for grace to do its deepest work. Gratitude rarely announces its arrival with fanfare. Instead, it emerges quietly, like a small green shoot breaking through hardened ground. In the middle of hardship, when weariness threatens to overwhelm, you begin to notice things you once overlooked. A brief warmth in your chest, a moment of laughter despite the heaviness, the simple beauty of light filtering through a window. At first, these are fleeting, fragile moments, easily drowned out by louder voices of worry or regret. Yet as you allow yourself to pause and notice, you realize that each glimmer is a seed, a quiet invitation to see your life with new eyes. Gratitude rarely announces its arrival with fanfare. Instead, it emerges quietly, like a small green shoot breaking through hardened ground. In the middle of hardship, when weariness threatens to overwhelm, you begin to notice things you once overlooked. A brief warmth in your chest, a moment of laughter despite the heaviness, the simple beauty of light filtering through a window. At first, these are fleeting, fragile moments, easily drowned out by louder voices of worry or regret. Yet as you allow yourself to pause and notice, you realize that each glimmer is a seed, a quiet invitation to see your life with new eyes. It is a strange alchemy. The very things that once felt like curses begin to reveal their hidden gifts. The trial that broke your confidence teaches you humility and opens you to receive help you would have rejected before. The disappointment that left you feeling hollow also clears a space within, making room for something truer to take root. The loneliness you endured sharpens your appreciation for genuine connection, so that even a small gesture of kindness becomes precious. You realize that gratitude is not about denying your pain, but about holding it alongside unexpected blessings, about making room in your heart for both. You think of the psalmist who declares, "I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth." At all times, the easy ones, but also the bitter, the uncertain, the lonely. You start to see how such gratitude is not naive optimism, but defiant hope. It is the decision to look for the good, not because it is always obvious, but because your heart needs it, because you choose to believe that even in hardship, God's presence is near. The gratitude that grows in trial is hard-won and honest. It names the ache, but it also names the grace that finds you in the midst of it. There are days when the practice feels impossible, when gratitude seems like a foreign language you barely understand. On those days, you begin small. A deep breath, the sound of rain on the window, the steady pulse of your heart reminding you that you are still alive. You write these things down, however ordinary, and notice how the list lengthens as your attention shifts. You give thanks not just for answers, but for the ability to endure questions, for the strength to get out of bed when hope is low, for the courage to ask for help, for the memory of kindness received. Gradually, gratitude reshapes the way you interpret your story. What you once called a setback, you now see as an unexpected detour that led you to a new understanding or relationship. What you first labeled loss is revealed as a clearing for something new to enter. Even your weaknesses, once a source of shame, become reminders of how you have been sustained, how help arrived, sometimes unasked for, just when you needed it. The shift is subtle but transformative. Gratitude moves you from asking, "Why me?" to "What might I learn here?" Or even, "How can I use this to bless someone else?" You notice that this gratitude is contagious. As you practice it, your perspective changes, and those around you are encouraged as well. You become more present, less driven by fear of the future or regret of the past. Your thankfulness opens you to beauty and possibility, even in the midst of uncertainty. You find yourself able to offer comfort to others, not because your own pain has vanished, but because you have learned to hold both sorrow and thankfulness in the same heart. The most surprising gift is this: gratitude does not require resolution. You do not need every question answered, every circumstance resolved, before you can be thankful. Instead, gratitude meets you in the middle of the struggle and quietly reorders your soul. It becomes a compass, guiding you back to what is good and real, even when storms continue. And with each small act of noticing, each whispered thank you, you participate in the transformation of your own heart. Where once there was only hardship, you now find the first signs of joy breaking through, the beginnings of a new story, shaped by the willingness to see blessing in even the hardest places. There is a subtle but unmistakable shift that comes when you begin to accept yourself through the lens of a love that does not waver, a love that sees your deepest flaws and embraces you all the same. For so long, your sense of self may have depended on comparison, on achievement, on earning approval, on avoiding mistakes, on hiding what felt unworthy. You were shaped by expectations, your own, those of others, and those whispered by the world around you. Each shortcoming or moment of failure carved a mark in your memory, quietly reinforcing the idea that you must always do more, be more, become someone else in order to deserve acceptance. Yet, as you lean into the experience of divine love, a love that is both shelter and promise, something deep within you begins to change. You sense it in the way shame loses its grip, in the gentle voice that speaks acceptance before you've earned it. You start to recognize that your value does not rest on shifting standards, but on the unchanging gaze of a creator who formed you in love and calls you by name. The old stories you've told yourself about being too much or not enough, about being defined by your mistakes or your strengths, begin to lose their power. In their place grows a quieter, sturdier truth. You are wanted, chosen, cherished, not as a project to be fixed, but as a beloved child. With this realization, your relationship to yourself is transformed. You become willing to see not only your gifts, but also your wounds, your quirks, your limitations, your struggles, without condemnation. You start to practice kindness toward the person you are right now, not just the person you hope to become. You see how every part of your story, even the chapters you wish were different, has shaped you into someone unique and valuable. You are no longer compelled to compete or to prove your worth. Instead, you rest in the security of being known and loved. The Psalms and promises of Scripture take on a new intimacy. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. These words become less a doctrine to recite and more a song to live by. You notice how the pressure to imitate others fades as you trust that you were designed with intention, that your strengths and weaknesses are woven together for a purpose. Even your failures and fears, seen in the light of divine love, become places where grace and wisdom grow. The desire to belong, once so pressing, is met with the assurance that you already do. You belong, first and foremost, to the one who made you. This new identity is not static. It is a living, unfolding relationship with the God who calls you beloved. Each day you learn a little more about what it means to live out of acceptance instead of striving. You become less afraid of imperfection, more open to growth, more willing to forgive yourself for what you cannot change. The masks you once wore begin to fall away, replaced by an authentic confidence that comes not from pride, but from security. You are free to risk, to love, to try and fail, knowing that your worth is not at stake. Others may notice a difference too. As you treat yourself with the gentleness you have received, you find yourself able to extend that same grace to those around you. You become less judgmental, less defensive, more willing to celebrate the beauty and diversity in others. You realize that embracing your own belovedness does not separate you from the world, but roots you more deeply in it, connected, compassionate, real. Over time, your sense of self becomes anchored not in your performance, not in the fleeting approval of others, but in the unwavering truth of divine love. You carry yourself differently. You walk through the world as someone who knows they are seen, known, and treasured. This is the beginning of true freedom, a life lived from the inside out, grounded in the assurance that, no matter what comes, you are loved beyond measure, and that is more than enough. Loneliness can be an ache sharper than pain, a silence that seeps into the corners of your days and settles over your soul like a heavy blanket. It arrives uninvited, sometimes masked by busyness or disguised by the noise of daily life, but it always finds a way to make itself known. You sense it in a crowded room where laughter swirls around you but never quite lands on your heart. In the long hours of sleepless nights, when the world sleeps but your thoughts spin endlessly. In the moments when you reach out and find only emptiness in return. This loneliness is more than physical absence. It is the longing to be understood, to be seen all the way through and not turned away. It is the deep human ache to belong. For a time, loneliness feels like defeat, a sign that something has gone terribly wrong, that you are somehow cut off from the love and connection you were made for. You may try to fill the void with distractions, with activity, with any comfort you can find, but none of it seems to satisfy for long. The ache remains, a persistent reminder of your need and your vulnerability. Yet it is here, in the barren landscape of loneliness, that something unexpected begins to happen. With nowhere left to hide, with all the usual crutches stripped away, you find yourself turning toward the silence with a new kind of honesty. Your prayers become simpler, your questions more raw. There is nothing left to prove or to pretend. It is in this stark, exposed place that the presence of God begins to reveal itself in ways you had never known before. At first, the comfort is faint, a gentle reassurance that grows in the quiet, a sense that you are not alone in your longing. You remember the words, "I will never leave you nor forsake you," and they become more than a promise, they become lifeblood. Gradually, you notice a companionship that does not demand performance, that asks nothing of you except your willingness to be present. The divine meets you not in the places where you are strongest, but precisely where you are most empty. You realize that the silence you once feared has become the very space where friendship with God is born. There are moments when this presence feels almost tangible, a comfort that wraps around you in your darkest hours, a peace that defies explanation. You might sense it in the stillness before dawn, in the lyrics of a song that speaks to your pain, in the deep sigh that finally releases some of your tension. Sometimes it is the unspoken knowledge that, even in your worst moments, you are fully known and yet fully loved. Loneliness does not always vanish. It often returns, sometimes stronger than before. But now, instead of crushing you, it becomes a kind of doorway. It opens your heart to a friendship that cannot be lost, a companionship that walks with you through the hardest nights and rejoices with you in the smallest triumphs. You realize, too, that God's presence is not a substitute for human connection, but the foundation that makes all other relationships possible. In the safety of being seen and accepted by the one who knows you best, you are set free to risk vulnerability. You become less afraid of rejection, more open to both giving and receiving love. The old patterns of hiding and pretending begin to give way to genuine connection, not because the fear of loneliness has disappeared, but because it no longer holds the final say. Gradually, what once felt like exile transforms into sanctuary. The loneliness that threatened to undo you becomes the birthplace of trust, of honesty, of a friendship that cannot be taken away. You learn to sit with yourself and with God in the quiet, not rushing to fill every silence, but savoring the nearness that grows there. The ache remains, but it is no longer empty. It is filled with presence. In the very place you felt most abandoned, you have found your truest friend, a companion who does not grow weary, who does not leave when things are hard, who calls you beloved always. And as you rise to face each new day, you do so with the quiet assurance that you are and always will be deeply, truly, never alone. There is a moment when prayer becomes something entirely different from the recitation of familiar words or the ticking of spiritual boxes. It often arrives when you are most weary, when your rehearsed prayers have run dry and all you have left are your truest fears and longings. At first, you may approach prayer hesitantly, unsure if you are saying the right things or if anyone is really listening. Yet as you persist, something shifts. Your prayers move from the surface to the depths, from formality to honesty, from ritual to raw and living connection. You find yourself no longer speaking for the sake of appearance, but reaching for the only one who can hold the weight of your heart. In this honest place, you discover that prayer is not about convincing God to act or about earning favor. It is not measured by eloquence or length, but by truthfulness, a willingness to bring all of yourself, messy and unfinished, into the presence of grace. Sometimes your prayer is little more than a sigh, a groan too deep for words. Sometimes it is a cry for help, sometimes a grateful whisper, sometimes only silence shared with the divine. But in every case, it is an act of trust, a decision to open your hands and release control, to risk believing that you are seen and heard and held. As you pray in this way, you begin to notice changes that have nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with the orientation of your soul. Where anxiety once pressed in, a quiet assurance takes its place. Not the certainty that all will go as you wish, but the peace that comes from knowing you are not alone, that your needs and fears are known in their entirety. The more you offer up your worries, the less they consume you. The more you surrender your plans and expectations, the freer you become to receive what is given, even when it differs from what you hoped for. Scripture's promises begin to take root. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds. You realize this peace is not something you manufacture by effort or willpower. It comes unbidden, quietly filling the spaces your fear once occupied. The practice of returning again and again to prayer, even when your faith is weak and your mind distracted, builds a resilience, a steady confidence that is rooted not in your circumstances, but in the one who listens. There are moments, of course, when doubts return, when fear resurfaces, when you wonder if your prayers make any difference at all. Yet even then, you are changed by the very act of reaching out, by choosing to trust in the midst of uncertainty. You see prayer for what it truly is, a lifeline, a dialogue, an embrace that carries you when you cannot carry yourself. Over time, you find yourself longing for these moments of connection, not as a last resort, but as your most honest home. Through this ongoing practice, prayer becomes a place of transformation. Your burdens become lighter, your heart grows braver, your view of yourself and the world is quietly renewed. You find yourself more able to let go of outcomes, more willing to accept both the blessings and the challenges that come your way. The fear that once ruled you loses its grip, replaced by a confidence not born of certainty, but of relationship, an assurance that, come what may, you are anchored in love and sustained by grace. And so, prayer becomes not just something you do, but the way you live, moving through your days with a posture of openness, ready to receive, willing to trust, at peace in the presence of a God who hears every word and every silence, and who answers not always as you expect, but always with perfect love. Something profound happens when you begin to see fear not simply as an adversary to be defeated, but as a doorway, a strange and paradoxical threshold that leads toward freedom you never imagined possible. At first, this notion feels impossible. How could the very thing that has haunted you, the force that has kept you shrinking back and gripping tightly to control, become the means by which you are set free? Yet, as you journey deeper into honesty and trust, you realize that fear, faced with courage and faith, transforms from a wall into a passageway. You begin to notice how, each time you meet your fear head-on, instead of running or numbing or fighting, you discover something about yourself that is larger than the fear itself. The act of turning toward what frightens you is an act of faith, a declaration that you are willing to see what lies beyond your anxious imaginings. In this way, fear becomes a guide, revealing where your heart most needs healing, where your trust in love and goodness is still growing. You realize that many of your fears are rooted not in real threats, but in old wounds, in unchallenged assumptions, in stories you have carried for too long. And as you bring these fears into the light, you find they begin to lose their power. This is not to say that fear ever disappears completely. Instead, it loses its ability to dictate your every move. You see how fear, when acknowledged and surrendered, opens up new possibilities. It compels you to reach for comfort beyond your own resources, to admit your need for grace, to ask for help and receive it. Fear points you toward connection, toward humility, toward a life that is not hemmed in by the need for absolute certainty. In facing fear, you begin to discover your own resilience, the quiet confidence that you can move through discomfort and emerge on the other side. Stories from Scripture and from your own life affirm this truth. You remember Peter stepping out of the boat, heart pounding, eyes fixed on Jesus as the waves rose around him. His fear was real, his doubt undeniable, but it was precisely this willingness to step into the unknown that made the miracle possible. So too, in your own story, moments of greatest anxiety often mark the threshold of transformation. Times when you chose to speak honestly, to risk forgiveness, to follow a calling that made no sense to anyone else. In each of these, fear was the doorway you had to walk through in order to experience what lay beyond. Over time, you notice that what you feared most fiercely often loses its grip when you no longer resist its presence. The worst-case scenarios that paralyzed you turn out to be less devastating than your imagination predicted. Or, if they do come to pass, you find unexpected strength to bear them. The fear that once drove you to hide now urges you toward authenticity, toward a fuller and freer expression of your truest self. Through the eyes of faith, you come to see fear as a tool, even a gift, a compass that points you toward the places where God is still inviting you to grow. It is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter. The freedom you long for is not found in the absence of fear, but in the willingness to move forward in spite of it, trusting that you do not walk alone. As this truth takes root in your heart, you find yourself living with greater openness. You dare to take risks, to love boldly, to embrace uncertainty as the place where miracles unfold. Fear no longer drives you into hiding. Instead, it calls you into deeper dependence on the one who is always present, always faithful. And so, step by trembling step, you walk through the door that fear presents, not into captivity, but into the wide, unexpected country of freedom. There comes a time, often after the storms have passed and the silence has done its quiet work, when you realize that joy is not something that happens to you, but something you learn to choose again. For so long, happiness seemed tethered to circumstances, a reward for when life went your way, a fragile spark easily snuffed out by disappointment or worry. But in the depths of your journey, you discover another kind of gladness, an inner joy that springs up not in spite of hardship, but within and alongside it. This joy is quieter, more enduring than the fleeting thrill of good news or the temporary comfort of escape. It emerges as you allow yourself to slow down and notice the gifts woven through your ordinary days. The golden warmth of sunlight after a long spell of gray, the taste of bread shared in quiet company, the way a song stirs hope when you least expect it. These are not grand events, but moments of presence, reminders that beauty persists even in the midst of struggle. You learn, slowly, to receive them as gifts and to let your heart open, even if only a little, toward gratitude. The Psalms become both map and mentor in this practice. You read the words of those who have gone before, their songs threading sorrow and praise into a tapestry of honest worship. You have turned my mourning into dancing. You have taken off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy. These ancient voices do not ignore pain, but insist that joy is possible within it, that it can coexist with tears. You begin to understand that real joy is not an escape from life's challenges, but a deep affirmation that even here, even now, there is reason to rejoice. As you practice, you find that joy often sneaks in through the smallest cracks. It might appear as laughter in the middle of a hard conversation, or a surge of affection for someone you once struggled to love. Sometimes it is the sheer relief of knowing you are not alone, the assurance that you are seen and cherished, even when you falter. The more you look for these glimpses of joy, the more you find them. They do not erase sorrow or shield you from pain, but they make the burdens lighter, the nights shorter, the hope more tenacious. True happiness, you realize, is not found in perfection or in the fulfillment of every desire. It is born from a heart willing to receive what is given, to rest in what is, to celebrate the gifts that remain, even when others are lost. It is the courage to sing, however softly, in the darkness, to let your heart echo the psalmist's confidence. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. You learn to notice the ways your soul is nourished by small mercies, by unexpected kindnesses, by the slow and steady faithfulness of the God who delights in your delight. This rediscovered joy becomes a safeguard, a buoy that keeps you afloat when waves threaten to pull you under. It is not naive or blind to the world's pain. Rather, it is honest enough to see the hardship and still choose celebration. You become someone who can comfort others from the overflow of your own gladness, who can carry light into the shadows, who can savor life even when it is not what you expected. With time, you understand that joy is a discipline as much as a feeling, a habit of the heart cultivated through attention, gratitude, and trust. You practice it daily, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with abandon. And in doing so, you slowly reclaim the freedom to live open-heartedly, with wonder, with hope, with a deep and resilient gladness that the world cannot steal away. Sometimes, in the most ordinary moments, you sense a peace that cannot be explained, an unspoken assurance that you are not walking alone. This peace does not come through effort or striving, nor does it always follow a change in circumstance. It simply arrives, soft as a breath, gentle as a hand resting on your shoulder, a presence that wraps around your heart and stills your racing thoughts. It is the nearness of the Spirit, the quiet gift of being led by something greater than yourself. At first, this presence is subtle. You might notice it in the hush that follows a deep sigh, in the way a wave of calm washes over you after days of unrest. It is the comfort that settles in the middle of confusion, the clarity that arrives just when you are ready to give up. Sometimes it's a word that leaps from a page, or a song that fills the room with a sense of possibility. You realize, often with surprise, that you are being guided, not pushed or driven, but gently invited to trust, to rest, to move forward with confidence that you are being held. You remember the old promise, "My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." These words begin to live within you, offering more than comfort. They become an anchor. When anxiety threatens to overwhelm, you pause and remember you are not alone in the storm. The Spirit's presence is not always dramatic. It is more often the steady companionship that never leaves, the silent reassurance that you are seen, known, and loved. Over time, you learn to recognize the difference between the urgent voice of fear and the quiet guidance of the Spirit. Fear clamors for attention, demands control, rushes you forward. But the Spirit leads gently, never forcing, never shaming, always drawing you toward deeper trust. Sometimes you are nudged to speak a word of encouragement, to forgive, to reach out, or to wait when you would rather run. Each time you follow, even in small ways, you discover more of that peace, the sense that you are moving in step with someone who knows the way ahead. In the Psalms, you find language for this experience. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. This closeness is not abstract. It becomes the air you breathe, the song beneath the noise, the gentle assurance that you are never abandoned. Even when you feel uncertain, even when the path twists and turns, you are aware that you are accompanied, your every step watched over, your burdens carried by hands stronger than your own. With each day, you grow more comfortable in this companionship. You turn to the Spirit not only in crisis, but in gratitude, in decisions both small and large, in quiet moments of wonder. You find yourself whispering prayers throughout the day, sometimes with words, sometimes with only your heart. The nearness of the Spirit becomes your source of rest, your well of courage, your reason for hope. Gradually, you come to trust this leading more than your own understanding. You realize that peace is not found by eliminating every uncertainty, but by knowing you are not facing it alone. You walk forward, hand in hand with the one who promised never to leave you, and you let that promise shape your days. Even when you stumble, even when your confidence falters, the Spirit remains, patient, gentle, unshakable. This is the miracle of presence, a peace that passes understanding, a companionship that does not depend on your strength, a gentle leading that makes you braver than you ever thought you could be. And in this closeness, you discover that you are not only safe, but cherished, guided by a love that knows no end. Trust is rarely tested in the comfort of certainty. It is in the moments when you step out onto unsteady ground, when you leave behind what is familiar and safe, that true faith is revealed. The image of Peter stepping out of the boat onto the turbulent waters comes alive, not as a distant story, but as a living invitation. You recognize in his trembling courage the echo of your own heart, the hope that maybe, just maybe, you too can do the impossible if you keep your eyes on the one who calls you. The boat is security, routine, everything you know how to manage. But there are times when a quiet voice beckons you into the unknown, inviting you to risk, to trust, to move toward a promise that lies beyond your reach. The call does not come with guarantees. It comes in a whisper, "Come." It is easy to hesitate, to measure the odds, to cling to what is safe. Your mind races with what-ifs and memories of previous failures. The waters look impossibly deep, the wind howls, and everything in you wants to retreat. Yet something in you responds, a longing to believe that you are not made only for the safety of the shore, but for the wonder that waits outside your comfort zone. With trembling resolve, you take a step. It is not a leap into recklessness, but a conscious decision to move forward in faith, even when the outcome is uncertain. Each act of trust is its own kind of miracle, a conversation you never thought you could have, a forgiveness you never believed you could offer, a venture or dream you feared was beyond you. Sometimes trust means letting go of a plan, opening your hands to loss, or surrendering your need for answers. Each time you step out, you discover that the waters, while wild, are not empty. The presence that called you is already there, steady beneath your feet, holding you up when your strength fails. The Psalms and stories of Scripture reinforce this paradox. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. You remember that the point is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move through it. Peter's story is honest. He falters, doubts, begins to sink. Yet even in his failure, he is not lost. A hand reaches out and catches him. In your own moments of risk, you too may waver. The winds of doubt may rise, anxiety may pull you under. But again and again, you find yourself held by a grace that refuses to let go. Trust in these moments is not bravado or the denial of risk. It is the courage to move forward anyway, to walk by faith and not by sight, to live as if the one who calls you is both faithful and able. You discover that trust, once practiced, becomes a muscle, a capacity to respond to new challenges with greater hope. Each step out of the boat deepens your reliance on the one who steadies your steps, teaching you that miracles rarely happen on the shore, but in the wild places where faith is all you have. In time, you realize that the story of walking on water is not just about overcoming fear, but about growing in relationship, learning to recognize the voice that calls you, to trust the character of the one who leads, to discover that you are never truly alone, even when the waves threaten to overwhelm. And so, you keep stepping out, again and again, into new and risky places, not because you are fearless, but because you are accompanied. You move forward, heart pounding, eyes fixed not on the danger, but on the promise that you are called, you are loved, and you are never forsaken. As the shadows of fear recede and trust becomes your steady companion, you begin to notice quiet but profound changes in your daily life. The old reflexes that once kept you braced for disappointment gradually give way to a lighter way of moving through the world. You no longer scan each moment for threats or rehearse every possible failure in your mind. Instead, you greet the day with a growing curiosity, open to the idea that goodness may find you even in unexpected places. The inner dialogue that used to be dominated by caution and self-protection now makes room for gratitude, for hope, for an almost childlike sense of wonder. This new life is not defined by the absence of difficulty, but by the presence of a deeper resilience and the quiet assurance that you are not alone. You find yourself making choices that once felt impossible, choosing to trust rather than to control, to forgive rather than to harbor old grievances, to speak honestly even when your voice trembles. Patterns of withdrawal or isolation soften as you let yourself be seen, your authentic self emerging with less fear of rejection. You notice the small ways you risk kindness, both with others and with yourself, allowing for imperfection and celebrating small victories.
Your habits shift as well. Where you once ran from silence, you now embrace moments of quiet reflection, returning to prayer and stillness not just in crisis, but as a natural part of your rhythm. Anxiety may still knock on the door, but it is no longer the master of your decisions. You breathe more deeply, savoring the gifts of ordinary life, the taste of food, the comfort of friendship, the miracle of simply being alive. You catch yourself smiling at strangers, extending encouragement more freely, living with an awareness that life is not something to be endured, but to be received. Relationships deepen as fear loosens its grip and makes space for real connection. You learn to listen more fully, to respond with compassion rather than defensiveness, to offer your presence without agenda. Even conflict loses some of its sting, for you have learned that your worth is not at stake with every disagreement. You become less invested in being right and more interested in understanding, in growing, in loving well. The boundaries you set are no longer walls to keep pain out, but healthy spaces that allow love and trust to flourish. Internally, the script of your life is rewritten. Where you once defined yourself by what you lacked or feared, you now sense your life as a story of provision, of being led, of becoming. You start to believe, in ways that are new and surprising, that you have something unique to offer, that your presence is a gift to the world around you. Old patterns of self-criticism soften under the light of compassion. Old habits of scarcity are replaced by generosity, both in spirit and in action. This transformation is not an overnight miracle, but the steady fruit of walking with trust day after day. Sometimes you stumble, sometimes you forget, sometimes old fears resurface. Yet each time you return more quickly to your center, to the place where you remember who you are and whose you are. The landscape of your soul is changed, not by willpower alone, but by the cumulative effect of choosing faith over fear, of letting love have the last word. Over time, you realize that a life shaped by trust is a life of possibility. You take more risks, Dream bigger dreams. Reach for joy even when sorrow lingers at the edges. You welcome uncertainty, knowing you do not walk alone. And in all these new patterns, you discover a freedom you never thought possible. A freedom not from challenge, but from the tyranny of fear. A freedom to live with an open heart, come what may.
As you move through this new landscape of trust and quiet freedom, another awareness begins to dawn, a perspective that stretches beyond the boundaries of a single day or even a lifetime. It is the gentle realization that your story is not confined to the here and now, that all the moments of joy and sorrow, gain and loss, hope and disappointment are held within a larger, unfolding narrative. The thread of eternity weaves through even the most ordinary hours, offering a hope that cannot be shaken by circumstances or exhausted by time. This eternal perspective does not remove you from the realities of daily life. Instead, it roots you more deeply within them, infusing each experience with a sense of meaning that outlasts every hardship. The Psalms echo with this hope. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The promise of eternity is not simply a far-off dream, but a living invitation to trust that every step, even the painful ones, leads somewhere purposeful. You begin to see your life not as a series of isolated events, but as part of a grander story. Each difficulty, each unanswered prayer, each burst of unexpected joy is gathered up and given meaning in light of forever. Loss, though real and painful, is no longer the final word. There is always the promise of restoration, of reunion, of a love that outlasts even death. This hope becomes an anchor, steadying you when storms come, reminding you that what feels like an ending may, in fact, be a beginning. The eternal perspective also softens your anxieties about time. The pressure to achieve, the fear of missing out, the relentless drive to make every moment count. You realize that you are not racing against a clock, but moving within the gentle rhythm of a story whose author is not in a hurry. There is space to rest, to wonder, to make mistakes and try again. The hurried striving falls away, replaced by the assurance that nothing is wasted, that even your failures are woven into the tapestry of redemption. This sense of eternity brings comfort when you face goodbyes, when loved ones are lost or seasons change. The sorrow is real, but it is held within the larger hope that life does not end with the closing of a chapter. Even grief is made bearable by the conviction that love endures, that relationships are not severed by time, but transformed and made complete in ways you can barely imagine. Death itself loses its sting. It becomes a doorway, not a wall, a passage to a new and unimaginable wholeness. The eternal perspective also softens your anxieties about time, the pressure to achieve, the fear of missing out, the relentless drive to make every moment count. You realize that you are not racing against a clock, but moving within the gentle rhythm of a story whose author is not in a hurry. There is space to rest, to wonder, to make mistakes and try again. The hurried striving falls away, replaced by the assurance that nothing is wasted, that even your failures are woven into the tapestry of redemption. This sense of eternity brings comfort when you face goodbyes, when loved ones are lost or seasons change. The sorrow is real, but it is held within the larger hope that life does not end with the closing of a chapter. Even grief is made bearable by the conviction that love endures, that relationships are not severed by time, but transformed and made complete in ways you can barely imagine. Death itself loses its sting. It becomes a doorway, not a wall, a passage to a new and unimaginable wholeness. With each passing day, You become more attuned to the signs of eternity shimmering in the present, a kindness that lingers long after the words are spoken, a sense of peace that defies logic, the unexplainable pull of beauty and longing. These are hints, reminders that you are made for more than survival, more than fleeting happiness. You are made for communion, for wonder, for a love that will never let you go. This hope is not escapism or denial of reality, but a lens through which you see all things differently. It grants you courage to live bravely, to forgive freely, to love without holding back, knowing that the story is not over. Every act of faith, every moment of compassion, every risk taken for love, echoes into forever. The future is not a blank space to be feared, but a promise that draws you forward, calling you to walk with expectation, to live with open hands and an undying hope. And so, with eternity in view, you take your place in the unfolding story, knowing that the best is yet to come, that every ending is also a beginning, and that nothing, not even the darkest night, can diminish the light of hope that has been set within you. There is a quietness that settles deep within you as the journey draws toward its hidden destination. A peace that is more than the absence of conflict, more than the temporary lull after a storm. It is a sense of having come home, not just to a place, but to yourself and to the one who shaped you from the beginning. The striving that once defined your days gradually gives way to a gentle surrender. You no longer feel compelled to chase after approval, to run from shadows, to defend yourself from imagined threats. Instead, you find yourself resting, truly resting, in a presence that holds all your stories, your hopes and regrets, your every unfinished prayer. This true peace is not easily won. It arrives after long stretches of wandering, wrestling, and waiting. It is the fruit of having walked through fear and sorrow, having learned to let go of what you cannot control, having discovered that you are deeply loved even in your weakest moments. The old voices that once whispered anxiety and shame now fade into the background, replaced by a quiet assurance that you belong. You sense yourself finally settled within your own skin, no longer at war with your own heart. The fractured parts of your life are gently gathered and mended, not by your own effort, but by a grace that has pursued you every step of the way. Coming home is not a return to how things were before, but the embrace of who you have become. You see yourself through gentler eyes, more patient, more compassionate, more aware of the sacredness in every breath. The habits of gratitude and trust have formed new pathways within, making it possible to receive the simple joys of the present without fear that they will be snatched away. You feel a deep, unhurried joy in small things, the hush of morning, the sound of laughter, the comfort of being known and accepted as you are. You realize that this peace is inseparable from presence, being present to your own soul, to those you love, to the ever-near spirit who whispers rest into your deepest places. There is no need to strive for perfection, no more exhausting search for answers, only the gentle rhythm of being. In this space, prayer is as natural as breathing, a steady communion that weaves through every moment of your day. You carry with you the certainty that you are never alone, that home is not just a destination, but a continual return, a daily arrival into the arms of mercy. This true rest gives you the courage to welcome whatever comes, to greet both joy and sorrow as companions along the way. You have learned that you do not need to have everything figured out to be at peace. You only need to remain open, receptive, and trusting in the one who has already made a home within you. The anxieties of the future lose their edge. For you know that whatever awaits, you will be met with the same love that has carried you this far. As you move forward, the line between arrival and journey blurs. Home is not a static place, but a way of being. A life lived from the deep center of love and trust. A continual coming back to the truth that you are safe, you are wanted, you are whole. Each day becomes both a new beginning and a quiet return. The story, with all its twists and turns, finds its meaning in this simple, profound reality. You are home, at last and always. And from this place of true rest, you are free to live, to give, to love without fear, knowing that you are forever held in the embrace of perfect peace.